I'm very happy to come and share with you our work. I will try to speak for probably about half an hour so that we can have a lot of time for questions. And the outline I prepared is just 4 things, really. One is a little bit of history. How did we get to this, how did we come to this work of gender evaluation? And second, some basics about the gender evaluation methodology that we use. And this, I brought a number of copies here to share later on with you. And then third, I want to present to you, because I think that's where the action research comes in, really the experiences, some case studies from developing countries. These are, we've worked with a number of projects on the ground, but I sort of chose 3 case studies that demonstrate some of the issues and some of the challenges that we've faced. And then lastly, some reflections about the work that we've done. Because yes, we have a few answers, but we also have a lot of questions ourselves coming out of the experience that we've had in the last, I guess we're now on our 9th year doing this. It takes a long time, this research. Okay, so why gender evaluation? We started our work in 2001. And really, it came from our own experience. We were sort of asked to contribute to an evaluation. At that time, in 2001, there was not any evaluation, or the evaluation being done on ICT for development. I'm not talking here about gender evaluation, was only starting, and this was being done. This was being done by one of our partners, the International Development Research Center in Canada. So they asked us to provide a critique on an evaluation methodology that was being developed, and that's really how we came to this work. And because one of the things we found is that they didn't have anything to do with gender, this whole evaluation methodology. And then we started the work. So after that, we then looked at some of the evaluations, or some of that has been. That is the work, the research that is being done. And what we've found is that a lot of the ICT for development projects did not integrate gender considerations. A few years down the track, for example, the study of 60 projects done by World Bank showed that there was really no gender planning or gender considerations in 60 ICT for development projects done by the World Bank, for example. So it really showed that there was a lack of work, whether it's theoretical work, whether it's action research work. There was nothing there. Whereas it's very well known that in development work, the evidence is that effectiveness and impact increases when you talk about gender. I mean, it's so in effect, what was happening in ICT for development work is that it's sort of the same pattern as some of the development sectors that we've known so far. It took a long time before health integrated gender. It took a long time before other development areas or fields looked at gender and integrated gender. So that's really where the impetus for the work started. It's very, so really we started with looking into the work that we've done, that we were doing in the organization. And so what the work has done so far is that I'm looking at 2 phases here. The first part of developing this evaluation methodology was 2001 to 2005, where we tested and developed the tool. We worked with 32 projects in 25 countries. What we did was we researched on what are the gender tools available, what are the gender evaluation tools available in any field, in the development field. So we looked at that, and then we looked at evaluation tools in the ICT for development sector, specifically evaluations that have been done. And we tried to see what fits in, what works for us. We had I think it was in 2000. So from there, we developed the first version of it. And then we tested that in 32 projects. They evaluated their projects. They looked at different fields. And I'll talk about what, the content of that later on. But this is how it came about. And by 2005, the results of the evaluation results and findings through that, we then managed to come up with this. And I have a few copies for you. After that, that finished in 2005. And then we found that there was still work to be done. In fact, there was much more demand. In fact, there was much more questions. There were much more people asking us about the need for capacity building around gender evaluation. It was not an easy thing to do. That's what people were saying. That's what organizations were telling us. So out of that work, we are now in what we're calling the second phase of this work. And we're presently working with 10 country projects, so a smaller number, and 2 regional projects. And the reason why it's smaller is it's much more involved. What we're doing, in fact, is building capacity around gender evaluation. And we're focusing on these 4 areas: telecentros, rural ICT projects, ICT policy projects, and localization. I don't know if you've heard about localization. These are projects that localize in the script. So they develop programs in, let's say, Nepali script. They develop programs in Hindi, in Khmer. So there's a network that we're working with and looking at, okay, they've developed programs, but because this is a way for universal access, but now they're in looking at how to develop digital literacy among, where in the different countries where they work. So we're working specifically with these themes because we feel that this is the way to broaden the reach. Because these are the most popular, if you like, these are the most popular ICT projects that are on the ground. So this is where we're at in relation to the project. Now, and at the moment, the project ends, this specific phase ends sometime in 2010, so the beginning of 2010. So we're in the middle of it, in fact. The projects that are evaluating, these 10 projects are currently evaluating their projects and then looking at what are the gender issues in telecenters, in rural ICT projects, etc. And that's where I picked the 3 case studies. It comes from the 3 organizations we're working with at the moment. So that's the little bit of background, of the action research that we are doing. In the first phase, we worked with a number of organizations, and I just thought that it would be good to actually show some of the people we work with. So these are different projects. You see on that part there, that's this is a radio program, for example, this was in Ecuador, the Quechua, and these are indigenous communities. So we worked with, these are the kinds of organizations and projects that we worked with. So going back then to what we found, in fact, from the first phase is that we have found one of the difficulties really in integrating gender is that there's really very little capacity for analysis and evaluation of gender-based inequalities. It doesn't even have to do with ICT projects. It's really about understanding gender relations, gender roles in community. So we're looking at, it's actually the same, in other fields. This really is very little capacity on the ground. So this is something that has come up. In fact, when we first started training people to use this tool, we came up with 2 things. One is evaluation. Organizations are not experienced in conducting evaluations. So that's the one difficulty. The other difficulty is that they really do not understand, there's really little still capacity in understanding and translating what gender inequalities are, what the gender issues are in communities, what are different gender roles, and what are the kinds of relationship that one has to consider when you're planning projects, when you're implementing projects. So those 2 things are are sort of connected with each other. There's a weak focus on gender in general in project design and implementation. So really what we thought was that our main challenge is to develop, if we want to develop evaluative thinking, and to us it's not about using this methodology. It doesn't have to be this, it can be anything. It's really about how do you develop effective evaluative thinking about gender and ICT, so that then you're able to change the way you work and the way you implement projects, the way you plan projects, the way you work with people on the ground. So that was the challenge that we felt has to be done in the action research. So that's okay. So that's the first part of my of the background that I wanted to tell you about. So that's just to give you an idea how the action research developed. What does this, and let me now talk about what this tool does. What we have developed is one, a gender analytical framework. And as I said, it's drawn from gender and feminist research and thinking. Really, we haven't really written anything original or anything new. It's really all out there. One has to just look for it. And one has to just look at how other development sectors are actually using gender analysis and feminist analysis in their work, and then we'll be able to look at that. The second is that to help people to sort of operationalize it, what we did was that it sort of has a guide that structures the integration of gender analysis when you evaluate projects. So really the basic structure is that you identify your gender issue in a community. Okay, so let's say you have an ICT project, telecenters. You identify what is it we're working in here. What are the different gender issues here? What are the, how many men and women? What kinds of roles do they play in the community? Who makes decisions? Who benefits from activities? Who are the leaders, etc.? So what are the barriers for men and women? Are they the same? So we sort of have you identify then what your gender issue is, and then you, from there you develop indicators that you will then follow you monitor that when you are developing, when you're implementing the project, so that at the end of the project you're able to see if you're changing anything when you are implementing the project. So that's really what it is. And I won't go into the details. I'm sure many of you have come across some of these tools before. The basis of, I think there's three different things in terms of the framework of the methodology. One is that we are saying that the ICT world is not flat. There are definitely, especially when we're working in developing countries, there's infrastructure, there are differences in access, affordability, pricing, there's differences in capacity, in terms of literacy, in terms of technical education. There are differences in services available, and there's differences in policy. So that is the first starting point in the framework itself. So already you have that. And then we overlay that with the point that says, and gender makes a difference. So if, for example, in the infrastructure, there's comparative access by women and men, and they are determined by income levels. Immediately you see that. So when you say infrastructure, when we talk about ICT and you say there's access to internet, when you look at access to internet, access to telecommunications, you must look at what are the comparative access, differential access of men and women. And a lot of the times, it's affected by income. And when you talk about income, immediately you then say, okay, what are the income levels of men and women? Do men and women spend the same amount of money on communications, for example? Do men and women have the same access to decisions in spending money? So all those come in when you're talking about infrastructure. So it's not just saying that, yes, I like telling this story. Very, very early on, I went to Hong Kong to do a presentation. In Hong Kong, they say every household has a PC, or every household has a connection with the internet. But when I talk to colleagues there, they're saying, but then in a household, the older women, the role in the household is to clean the computer. It's not to have access to the information. So it sort of immediately tells you there's a difference there. So one of the things that you need to look at really is how it plays out in terms of the family, the community. Capacity, again, affected by literary and education levels. It's very well known that when you talk about education, women are less educated than men. Literacy levels of women are usually lower than men. So when you say, okay, we have projects, training projects around using the internet, or even in terms of to create jobs in the computer area, in this area, you again are affected by literacy rates and educational levels. So one must look at that. So it's not all equal. There's definitely a difference there. Services are affected by relevance of service. They're affected by mobility and safety issues. Safety issues is a good one. You may put in a telecenter in a place where women will not go because it's not safe for them. Mobility is affected by many things. For example, mobility is affected by not only the ability to, not only distance, but it's also affected by what women are allowed to do, or what are the obstacles for women in going to places. So all that, and mobility is affected by safety. If it's not safe, we will not be mobile. So you see immediately, there's always these issues that impact on the way that men and women are able to access service. It can be a very simple thing, you think, but then in fact if you're not able to see the differences and the situations of women and men, it will be difficult for you to in fact make sure that that you even, the way that you design your project. We know of, for example, services that are in areas where women are not allowed to go, near temples, for example, religious constraints that affect if men and women, or if women are able to actually access the service. Maybe because some of them are in temples where women are allowed to go, or mosques where women are not allowed to go. So those are some of the issues I think that one has to look at when we talk about this. Governance, I think, is also affected by opportunities for participation by men and women, and a lot of this is around women not. It's a known fact as well that women are less. When we participate in decision making, women participate less than men. But it's not just. I think what is important is not just the numbers, the equal numbers of women and men participating, but it's also what this means. When one develops, I think policies are developed better if women's needs are considered. So I think that's one of the issues around governance. And I'll show you, there's an example I think that I can talk about that shows this a little bit more, but let me proceed, because it's, so the first part that I showed was the ICT. You need to consider differences in relation to ICT. The second is that looking at the gender differences. And then on top of that, and I've talked about this, there's also differences, there's also social and cultural variables. And this is where I think a lot of the discussion around gender roles and relations come in. In different countries, different communities, gender roles and relations happen in different ways. And this is where the challenge comes in, is to actually identify what are the different gender roles, and how can you look at, how do you identify or see what the relations are, so that you're able to then change that. For us, for GEM, this is what it sort of advocates. And I think this is also where the action research comes in. You look at what are the ways where you can change gender roles and relations, so that you you contribute to making it a more equitable situation in the different communities we work with. So what you need to, what GEM helps us look at is how does the interplay of these variables impact on women and men. So okay, so that's really just a very brief background of the tool itself, And now to the more exciting part, and this is really where it comes alive. So the first project is a Bangladesh project. This is called the DNet Paletutia Helpline. This is like a call center. You're all familiar with call centers, no? But they say this is their model of a people's call center, because this call center was established by an organization in Bangladesh we work with, and their idea was to find out if access to information and knowledge with the complementary use of ICT had any role in addressing poverty. They have 5 things they do. They develop content, they develop multiple channels of information and information knowledge exchange, and they have an intermediary. This is what they call the human interface between information and knowledge. And then they also develop a marketing approach, okay? Now, they work in rural areas in Bangladesh. And I want to focus on these intermediaries. This is like a telecenter, but a telecenter, the classic example is that you have computers, a center, you have internet connection, people come and they can have then access to information. This is a different kind of model, but based on that, they change it a little bit. What they have is, say, in the center, in their office, they have then the database, they collect knowledge, they collect all the information. And then they hire intermediaries. They call them the mobile operator ladies. When they hired them, they said that they had to be female, so that the project will, so that the human interface, the person who interfaces the knowledge, the information with the community, can be accessed by both men and women. This being Bangladesh, they've already learned from a lot of experience. Grameen Bank, you've heard a lot of experience. There's really strong NGO community there. There's really strong research. And this is their basis. They say that cultural obstacles prohibited women from interacting with men without the presence of at least one of their male relatives. So that already they've identified what the gender issues are. That's why they say that they have to be women, they cannot be males. This would have made access impossible for widows and women who had no male relatives at all. I mean, this is something you wouldn't, if you are not conscious of it, you wouldn't even consider it when you plan. So immediately they managed to be inclusive of the women. It would have also been very difficult for women to request for information related to their reproductive and sexual health care, as well as issues of violence and sexual abuse. Now that is their assumption, okay? Then they did the evaluation. So let's see. So hence the mobile operator ladies were hired, they were trained, they were equipped with mobile phones, yeah, and which were used to connect the rural users with a help desk to consult with the experts. So then you see they have a database of information in their office. They have someone answering the phone, like a call center. The mobile operator lady would then go to the village. If there are questions, what she will do is she will give them, if she can answer the question, she would. But if she cannot, she will then call through her mobile phone and then ask for help. So that's their model. And then this in the center, they would then give her a response. So these are all the elements of it. They had a knowledge database in local language. And then they had a directory database with information of different service providers. So if they have problems, let's say they need help around health issues or rights, legal rights, they would then be able to refer them, okay? So can you see that? That woman with the one who was with the paper, she's the mobile operator lady, okay? So this is how they should say that they moved from one household to the other. And that woman on the left-hand side, you can't see it very well because of the light, but she has this thing, what is it, the ear? Headphone, yeah. So she's a help desk expert and she's responding to a villager's question. On the other side, the man in the middle has a phone, yeah? And she's talking to her. Well, I don't know if that really is, but this is the illustration that they're trying to provide. No, he is talking to her, and this woman on the right-hand side is the intermediary. So that's how they work. That's how the model works. Okay, so this is one example. What they did evaluate was to find out what it meant to have, what was the impact of this mobile operator ladies as human interface. So what they found out is that the highest number of queries were indeed by poor women, and they had to do with reproductive and sexual health care. So which means that their assumption was correct. Although they also said in their evaluation that in fact there were men were not a male, males in the community also couldn't actually, the men were not very open to asking questions to the female. So but they also found out that what happened was the men directly called the help desk. They didn't go through the women, the operator ladies. So what they concluded was that this did not stop the men, in fact, from asking help. So it didn't have a negative impact in terms of the men getting help from the from the center. They found out that women's literacy rate and educational levels were much lower than men's, and women had more need for a human interface. So they sort of confirmed that. They also found out that mobile ladies addressed common obstacles rooted in values, beliefs, etc. What they found was that it was easier for women to talk directly with other women when they talk about constraints that they feel, that they face. And lastly, the helpline enhanced the social status of mobile operator ladies, facilitating new empowering roles for women in the community. This role was not there before. There was no such thing as a woman being able to go from one house to the other and being a authority in a sense who can provide solutions. Are you okay? So this role is a new role that meant actually new agency for the mobile operators themselves, but at the same time, it also showed the community that there is this possible role for women, because these women are not necessarily, women who are educated or high level of education. These were women in the village, really. So that's the first example, and let me give you two others, and then we come to the Philippines. This is a more basic example that I wanted to use, mainly because of how they used what the evaluation meant for them. The Philippines, these are called the community e-centers. These are telecenters, classic telecenter models, and they have a network in the Philippines, and they roll them out in different villages. I think they have at the moment about 800 community e-centers. We worked only with 2 of them. And what we did was we trained them to look at gender. We sort of looked at, evaluated how they used gender in what are the gender issues, considerations in the community that they're working in. Because what we found out was that gender was not integrated in their design. In fact, one of the things they said was that the purpose supposedly was towards affordable access for ICTs. To low-income, vulnerable, and disadvantaged groups, and they identified women in that disadvantaged groups. You know how this is very common. Women are supposed to be in the vulnerable and disadvantaged groups all the time. But they did not actually have any gender considerations in their plans. They had no gender or sex disaggregated data. They didn't actually know the community that well. And this is that's the telecenter. One of the telecenters we work with. It's not very rural. It's sort of peri-urban area. We worked with 2 communities, a peri-urban community, and one is in the fishing, more rural fishing. The Philippines has 7,000 islands, so we have a lot of islands where we can do. There's a lot of good swimming as well. So if you want to come for swimming and diving, that's also a good place to go. Okay. So anyway. it's, as I said, it's pretty basic in this, the findings here. So one of the things they found out is that, in fact, which also surprised me, there's not much gender difference in terms of absolute rates of usage. Although more women, and in fact, more women visited telecenters in the last 6 months. I mean, I think, to me, it is actually quite significant to say that, because then it sort of tells you that, in fact, women are using and interested in using these telecenters. They're interested in using the internet. That's what it tells you. The differences could be seen in the ways women and men use the telecenters, their perceived value, and the potential dangers. And I'll explain that a little bit. One of the things that they found is that women come to the telecenters to use them to meet other people. It's quite a growing thing in my country. And people see that in different ways. Some say that it's not a good thing because it is culturally, it's morally, it's not right. But others are saying, but then this is actually also agency. If you're able to find ways of perceiving relationships, then it's also something that there's something changes in the community. I think it's too, it's very, I sort of want to add as well that this is mainly perception. It's not based on any like deep research yet, but this is one of the social, I think, phenomena that one could look at. In the same way that migration in my country has affected family relationships. There's so many social changes that's happened because of migration. There's a lot of Filipinos who migrate. I think the way that women are using, or even men for that matter, but mostly women are using the internet for relationships, is something that potentially could have a lot of changes, no? That we could look at. So that's why it said there's difference in the way men and women look at the value of the way that they use the internet. There are also differences in patterns of use and utilization in relation to age, education, and income. It's sort of standard in a way, no? One of the things that has come up, though, is that here is that a lot of the younger people are using it so much more than the older members of the community. And again, there are issues of what it means in terms of culture, what it means in terms of, for example, again, young boys and young girls. Most of the young boys use it for gaming. Predominantly, it's sort of it comes out in the 2 telecenters, and the girls use it more for chatting. They use it for research. They use it for school. So that again has come out. And as I said, the research here is a little bit more basic in the sense that it does show what it has done for the telecenters is that it's given them a baseline. That's what the evaluation has sort of given them. They sort of, in the research that they did. And the last example I want to give is Nigeria. This is interesting. We have a member, sorry, that's a wrong spelling there. They're called FANSWAM. They've set up Nigeria's first community wireless network. FANSWAM works in the northern part of Nigeria. It's very rural. Sorry, no, actually it's peri-urban, but they actually do work with a lot of women who work in the rural communities. They have so it's a foundation, and they do have different activities. And they recently set up a wireless network because they want to extend the reach, no? At the moment, they have about 3,000 clients, and 98% of them are women of the FANSWAM Foundation. So what they wanted to look at is what is the female uptake of wireless services, and to explore how ZNet affects poverty levels of levels of women and their families. Okay, so that's a information agent. Just so you have a feel, no, of. They say she's an information agent, and she's a proud owner of a successful maize crop. Because they also do, they support they do microfinance projects with this women. Okay, so what did they find out? DNet's wireless signal reaches all of its 10 target communities. So really the problem is not about the infrastructure as such. But what is the problem is that it's actually the lack of hardware, the computer hardware and the energy sources, so electricity. That's one of the issues that they found. So the signal, the wireless is not a problem. What happens is that they have centers where they have farm centers where they have computers, you know, where they can have connectivity to the internet. And it's not very, so the women, because they're all very low income, they have to actually travel to the center. So in fact, even if they have, the assumption that you have a wireless network may not necessarily mean easier connectivity, because I guess their community really is a very poor community. So they're still limited. So they actually need to find a lot more solution in terms of making the wireless network more useful, or to broaden the actual connection for their members, in fact. So a lot of them still have to travel to the centers. The problem with the cost is that the bandwidth. It's very high cost of bandwidth still, and in Africa generally it's still very high. I don't know what your rates are here, but definitely in Africa it's one of the highest rates comparable, you know, when you compare it to what people are earning. And then there's also the other thing that they found that they concluded was that the low literacy rates, including written English of women farmers, affects access to content. So these are some of the issues that they found out. Okay. So in summary, they say that they still say that there's a large market for their service, you know, their wireless service in the rural communities. But what they need to look at is the low disposable income, because the bandwidth is high. The cost of bandwidth is high. They need to look at illiteracy and what that means in terms of what kind of connectivity and content they provide. So this is what they need to look at, because what they really have been trying to do is to use the wireless to be able to get a lot of their clients much more connected. So what they say that the evaluation has, these are some of the recommendations that they have now are looking at. No, they say that it's more that DNet wireless network is more likely to achieve their poverty reduction objectives if it is deployed as part of a wider program of support for rural female farmers. So in fact, what they're really saying is that technology, where it's not just about having a wireless network, that there's a potential there, but what they need is to develop more programs so that they're able to use those programs in connection with their wireless network. More microfinance programs, for example. I think they're also looking at energy sources, etc. So this support has to address access, infrastructure, capacity building, content, while providing opportunities for increased awareness and participation of women. They also say that the women prefer voice communication over written or SMS modes. So this is what they're trying to look at now. They need to develop more voice communication in the services that they provide. And this has to do with illiteracy, really, rather than so. But this also has to do with cost, because I guess voice would be much more expensive than SMS. So those are some. These are. This is the recommendation that they have in these 3 projects. So that's 3 of the projects we've worked with, and they've used the evaluation. I think has uncovered many different things. Some of them are similar, but some are there's also varied. So I guess just to I'm going to some conclusions which coming out of some of these case studies and also some of the other projects we've worked with. One of, I think, and I'm just focusing on 4 things. And I'm coming back to what does, when we talk of the three things, like the ICT, overlaid with gender. And I think one of the important things that we looked at is that, one, access to resources. So ICTs can provide access to resources and contribution to income. That's an important thing, I think. When you're looking at ICT projects, you need to look at how it contributes to access to resources for men and women. What does it? And resources here, I mean, it's not just about income. I think it's also about, this is about knowledge, it's about information, etc. So we need to it's not, when we think of whether they're telecenters, whether they're computer training programs, etc., it needs to contribute to increasing access to resources. The second point is contribution to income, which is a very important thing, I think, especially for women. Because I think income, an increase in income can mean many things for women. One story that I want to come back to is the information ladies. One of them said that because they are paid, and for some of them it's the first time they're paid. This is the first. So one of them said that the first time that she earned the money she earned, she bought a new sari. Which is, it's like, it's a very simple thing, but for her, the symbolic meaning of buying a new sari is, one, she can actually buy something from her money that she's earned herself. And secondly, it is also about her new perception of herself. So sometimes it's very small things, but then if you have, I guess, a framework where you can look at it in a framework, it becomes, you understand the significance of the change. They may be small incremental changes, but then if you're developing a project, you're implementing, when you're aware of this, I think it makes you think more of how you then are designing the way you work with people. Because and I come back to this, and that brings me to the second point, the impact on self-confidence, self-esteem, and agency. Again, if I come back to this woman, it's a question of, a lot of women will say that they've, when they learn new skills, computer skills, something they've never done before, they say that they have increased self-confidence, increased self-esteem. What does that mean for men and for women? I think for a lot of, if you read, there's a lot of feminist literature that will tell you that self-confidence and agency is a very important source of empowerment for women, really. Because that's really personal empowerment is very important in developing one's agency. And one's agency is important in terms of making one's decisions and in changing relationships in family, whether it's family or community. If one is more confident, one has more agency, one has more opportunities, then you're able to change and confront inequality. And I think that's where that comes in. So you can extend that analysis, or that when you say that, okay, what does it mean if a woman, there's many projects, like Microsoft training on, I don't know, Word, Microsoft training on how to use Excel in a community, in a rural community. I mean, does that mean anything? And sometimes they don't, but sometimes I think if you actually try and find out how they connect to what women use it for, or the impact on how women see themselves when they learn new skills, then maybe they can find, the ways in which you find that women are changing or women are being empowered. So then, lastly, those two things, it's sort of like then leads to emergence. That can be emergence of new roles, which can lead to changes in relationships. So I guess to me, it's that, you're looking at, those are some of the things that we've learned through the different projects, and also through working our way through this methodology, is that we look at changes. We look at changes in terms of access to resources, contribution to income. We look at all these things, changes in roles, changes in relationships. And the very last one is my final note on gender evaluation. For us, though, what we find important in this work is that we feel that the evidence of change in gender roles and relations, and that's documenting it, we can use that for more gender-sensitive policies and programs. And this is what we hope to use some of the lessons we learn here. Evaluations can contribute to developing benchmarks and indicators for gender equality in ICT, and I think you do some of that work here as well. And there's many other work that contribute to that. From our end, our contribution is mostly around qualitative indicators, not so much in the quantitative indicators and the benchmarks. And lastly, to developing capacity in gender evaluation, and for that matter, gender planning, is a key contributing factor in mainstreaming gender in ICT for development. Our experience is that it's very important to, if I come back to my first, slide, is to say that one of the problems really is that there's not very much capacity in this field. When you talk to people about gender and evaluation, it's sort of, I have a colleague who says you talk to them about two very difficult things, gender and evaluation, and they sort of run to the hills. They don't know what to do with it. And ICT, so it's not an easy thing to do. And in fact, we've come across a lot of our partners who say this is so hard to use. We don't actually know how to use this. Even ourselves, we sort of come back to it and say this doesn't make sense. It's really a whole process, and we found ourselves, and we didn't mean to. We found ourselves working now for what, 8, 9 years now into it, and we feel that we still have so much to learn. So I think the key really is to develop commitment around and the framework, understanding around understanding gender concepts, gender roles, etc., and how that plays out, and being convinced that this is something that's useful. So, yeah, I'll end there, and I hope that's useful for you all. Thank you.